There's a code in DNA that is very real, it's not a metaphor. Every triplet of particles that forms DNA, every triplet of nucleotides stands for, in the same way that a human code stands for something, a particular amino acid that will form a protein. And what in that chapter, Deleuze says when three-dimensional expressivity becomes one-dimensional, it can now detach itself from the specific form of a crystal, from the specific form from a mountain, and begin generating all kinds of different forms, the different forms of living creatures. Because now you have a specialized line of expression, DNA. DNA, of course, makes possible the emergence of plants and animals which are excitable cells. Excitability, which is something that very few minerals exhibit. There are a few minerals that are excited by electricity, that are excited by pressure, that are excited by temperature, but they are dwarfed by the sensitivity and excitability of even the most humble bacteria. Bacteria can already detect gradients or gradients of nutrients and swim towards them, or gradients of toxics and swim away from them. They can become excited. They have become capable of responding and sensing the world. And with that emergence, with the emergence of sensibility, we now have a more complex form of expressivity. In another chapter of that book called The Refrain, in which Deleuze and Guattari do basically their theory of music. It's a very important chapter for musicians to read, because they indeed do the history of classical music and show how it becomes more and more cosmic until it gets to Schoenberg and beyond. They play special emphasis on another break that takes place once living creatures have arise, the emergence of territoriality, the emergence of territorial animals. Because in territorial animals, fingerprints, which as I said belong to even the humblest form of matter, becomes signature. With a territorial animal, something that used to be a material flow, and I'm going to talk right now about the simplest form of territorial markings. The simplest form of territorial markings are when you transform feces and urine, which is to be part of the flow in a food chain, into a symbolic marker for a territory. A dog marks its territory with urine. A wolf marks its territory with feces. Odors, which used to be a kind of byproduct of a digestive process, have now become a signature. From here on, my territory begins. This belongs to me. I'm prepared to defend this territory. Don't cross this territory. You don't need words for animals to be able to mark their territories that way. And with territorial behavior, a new line of expression can become detached. Let me give you some examples. In many animals, not only feces and urine become territorial markers, but also the colors of their skin. Fishes who are territorial undergo hormonal changes, and if they are a very pale orange, they become a very bright orange the moment it comes to fight other fishes for their territory. Those changes, though, are still mediated internally. The animal is not choosing to express itself. Color is one means of expressivity, but for instance, let me give you an example of how color can then migrate from the skin, in which it is genetically determined, to being now chosen by the bird. There is a particular species of bird called bowerbird, which in order to seduce a female needs to build a nest, needs to build an architectural structure. There are several species of bowerbirds. One species has a very bright blue plumage. I mean, a chromium blue that is almost impossible to miss. It's so attractive as far as his feathers are concerned that he builds a relatively simple nest for the female. I mean, he's very confident that the female is going to come to him because of his bright colors. Then you have another species of bowerbird in which only a few feathers are blue, everything else is kind of brown, and for the same reason his nest now has to become much more complicated. When you look at the nests of the fully blue bird and the bird that has lost some of the blue from its plumage, the second bird builds a much more magnificent structure. It is now beginning to express himself due to the lack of internal expressivity. Finally, there are bowerbirds who have lost completely all the blue color in their feathers. Now they don't only build a magnificent nest that is much better than the other two nests, he actually goes and picks up little blue ribbons, little blue bottle caps that are blue, little tiny blue pieces of paper, and decorates his nest with blue objects. Now Deleuze... And then I shot the bird. Deleuze sees in the bowerbird an example of how expressivity by itself migrates from the skin slowly to the work of art, to the nest in which now the blue is not genetically determined, the blue is found by the bird deliberately, because it knows that it has lost that blue expressivity in its own body. But for the same reason, the bird has become an artist. A simple artist, but an artist. Song is another way in which birds express themselves. Birds, of course, can go from mere chirpings to repetitions of a single motif, which are relatively boring. In all cases, they are trying, of course, to express their identity. They're expressing their identity as owners of a territory, but they're also expressing their identity as members of a species to the female of the species. Any song can do that. But there are a few birds which, just like the naked or drab a bowerbird, go beyond just expressing something, expressing ownership of territory, and begin in a way singing the praises of life. These are birds like the nightingale or the blackbird. The nightingale and the blackbird sing an incredibly elaborate song that never repeats itself. They need to learn to sing. It's a skill that the birds learn. It doesn't come in their genes. If you take a baby blackbird and put it in a box so that it cannot hear the adult song, it comes out fully grown, singing a few notes that you can identify as the song of the species, but none of the flourishes, none of the style, and so on. Deleuze says that with the advent of blackbirds and nightingales, signature, the signature with which we mark our territory, has become style. And have become style because these birds, in order to differentiate themselves from each other and in order to seduce females, need now to create their own type of song. Oliver Messiaen, which is a musical composer, religious composer of organ music and piano music of mid-20th century, one of the great masters of classical music in the 20th century, said himself, as a composer and as a musician, nightingales and blackbirds are artists. They have style. Art was not born with human beings. And that type of idea is what excites Deleuze. Is not only are making ourselves capable of being affected by bird song, not only making ourselves capable of being affected by bird, fish, and other colors, but not only allowing ourselves to be affected by the expressivity of three-dimensional shapes, geological shapes, but also to recognize that we are not the only ones in this planet that can invent new expressions. Certain birds can also do it. And when the first humans were beginning to draw paintings in their caves and were beginning to mark themselves with tattoos and were perhaps beginning to express their grief with certain moans and sounds, they were already surrounded by a world in which every single item in that world was singing the praises of life.